So we've made it through another year. You know, last year was such a good year for movies, but I think in some areas, this year might have actually topped 2022, believe it or not. At least in the quantity of films that I'm going to be talking about. Last year, once I got through the honorable mentions, I did a top 10 list. I'm not going to do that this year. I actually have a top 15. And on top of that, the honorable mentions themselves are double what I had last year. And our first honorable mention is David Fincher's latest film, The Killer. A very interesting and unique take on kind of like the action thriller revenge genre. Because not a lot of the movie is just two people talking. It's not technically a silent film because you get this great monologue from Michael Fassbender, who gives an incredible performance. It's just this monologue that continues throughout the movie. It makes up this movie. It puts you in the headspace of this killer. It's a film that manages to be compelling with minimal dialogue, and for me, it was perhaps one of the most unique film experiences of the year. A Good Person, perhaps the most underrated and overlooked film of the year. Two amazing performances in Morgan Freeman and Florence Pugh, a compelling movie showing how grief affects different people differently. It's a movie that is not really formulaic, even though we've seen this type of movie several times over. Very kind of depressing at various points, but it's a movie that still has slight hope to it. A Man Called Otto. This is an interesting one. I actually have no notes for this one. I guess I was so interested in this character's life that I wasn't thinking about anything else. Kind of a frustrating movie at times because Tom Hanks plays this old curmudgeonous dude that is just kind of rude to everyone. And you kind of have to get used to that tone in the movie, and over time he softens up. And this movie goes to some powerful places with that. It's a film that manages to have humor, as well as discuss a serious topic such as suicide. And it blends that cohesively to make one of the most emotional films of 2023. Air. A film that, even though I'm not into basketball, it hooked me. It's not just an underdog story, it's also a story about sports reform, about brands changing. It's serious when it has to be, it's funny when it has to be, it's well directed, but what tops it all is just a fantastic cast all around. Past Lives. Two friends who once maybe loved each other a bit more than just friends, and are now trying to figure that out as they go into adulthood, now that one of them has moved on with a marriage. A very realistic portrayal of that, where I was telling people after I saw this film that there's a very Hollywoodized version of this movie out there that could have existed. But this movie is very much down to earth. This is Celine Song's directorial debut, and I'm very intrigued to see where she goes after this. Here's a surprise, Dungeons and Dragons. A video game movie that is way better than it should be. That's fun. It has a great cast, particularly Chris Pine and Hugh Grant as a fantastic villain. But the fact that this movie pulls off a surprising amount of heart. I'm not sure how people are going to react to this statement, but I was surprised that the way I felt about the movie, it was like I was watching the next Guardians of the Galaxy. Gran Turismo. Another video game movie that's better than it should be. I enjoyed District 9, but this might be my favorite of Neil Blomkamp's films to date. This is a very excitingly directed version of racing that, as much as I've seen racing films before, I've never quite seen it filmed this way. The Iron Claw. A movie that if you just watch the trailer, it seems primarily a sports movie, primarily about wrestling. It also incorporates brotherhood, masculinity, even climbing the ladder of fame. Touching on the masculinity side of things, it's a film that seems to want to touch on toxic masculinity, but it's not a film that tears men down. Great performances all around, especially Zac Efron. He gives his career best performance. Inside, Willem Dafoe stuck in one place, and he loses his mind. I mean, what else do you want in life? I love Willem Dafoe, a movie where at times it's a very straightforward survival story. Him trying to survive in this locked building. At the same time, a lot of visual storytelling. It's a movie that gets pretty weird. Weird at times in a pretentious fashion because it deals with art. It's a slow burn, but it still manages to move pretty fast. That generates a lot of questions. I can't wait to see the film again to interpret it again. The Artifice Girl. A movie about this tech developer that makes this AI program that looks like a 12-year-old girl to put on video chats online to catch sexual predators. This is the type of sci-fi that I love, where it is kind of this futuristic-ish idea. I mean, we're getting so close with AI that we can probably do this right now, but kind of this interesting concept, but told very realistically. A film that sets up a compelling dynamic between its three main characters, that sets up compelling questions that now we are going to have to ask as a society. At what point does AI become conscious and we have to evaluate its own rights? It was one of the most enthralling experiences of the year. The Boogeyman, a film that kind of seems to divide audiences online. Some people really don't enjoy this movie. Some people kind of dig it. I'm in the camp that kind of digs this movie. Great use of sound with solid characters, a pretty good creature design. It's surprisingly well directed. There's a lot of nice tension in this film. And it has good use of jump scares. It has jump scares in the right places. And for the most part, they are pretty effective. While the movie is still PG-13, it still manages to be pretty brutal. It's a movie that I included on this list because I just wanted to show this film some love. And I would definitely watch this one again. Joyride. I kind of had to set aside a bit my critic side and just ask, what did the movie make me feel? It's a movie that is kind of tonally disjointed, that feels like it's trying to be a bit too much. But at the end of the day, what did it make me feel? It was a heartfelt tale about friends, and that always hits a soft spot with me, and just a very funny, raunchy experience. Creed 3. Fights are well shot, it's pretty brutal at times, great music, and the fact that you have more backstory for Adonis Creed in this film, expanding his character more for what seems to be a fitting conclusion for this franchise. They might do a fourth Creed, but if they ended it here, I wouldn't be complaining. And finally, an honorable mention inclusion that might get me in trouble for real, The Flash. Doesn't always have the best writing. The CGI is kind of shockingly mismanaged, but it still managed to rise above those problems and managed to deliver a solid experience. I enjoyed seeing Batfleck one last time. Here you get a more serious Ezra Miller. You get some cool introductions of other characters into the story, being Michael Keaton's Batman and Supergirl. The action is pretty exciting. While it's not one of the best DCEU films, I had a really good time with it. That was a lot of films, but I still managed to find 15 other ones that I'll put on top of that. Just a quick disclaimer for you guys, because I forgot to include this bit in the actual video, talking about opinions, that yes, these are my own opinions. If I was doing this list just based on the quality of the films themselves, it would be drastically different from what I have. So just keep that in mind. Also, something that I've heard before, and I'm going to do it myself, a grade that the film receives doesn't really matter here. There's going to be a part where I put a B+ above an A-. That's a thing. So this is not just a strict ranking. This is just a ranking of the films as they meant the most to me. Enjoy. So let's get started, finally, with number 15. Evil Dead Rise has some of the grossest horror scenes of the year, done for the most part with practical effects. But what really pushes this movie up there is its concept. The fact that it's a mother that's a threat to her children. A mother that gets possessed, with a great central demon performance by Alyssa Sutherland, who I haven't even heard of that name anywhere else. I haven't seen this person anywhere else. But she's a horror icon. And on top of that, just adding on to the motherhood theme, where it's a good journey for our main character. Her now having to step up, protect these kids, and trying to see if she could be a mother figure. A movie in this series that stands on its own perfectly, and one in the franchise that is honestly one of my favorites. Megan was a surprise. A January horror movie that wasn't just at least fine, it was actually great. Megan is also a new horror icon. this entity that's very smart and also very chillingly scary that manages to be very heartfelt, but also cut someone's throat open. And yes, I did watch the unrated version, which I feel like having seen that unrated version with all the blood put in it elevated that film a bit for me. But on top of that, the human characters are equally as interesting. A movie that mixes comedy with horror. It's a movie that has an admittedly weird concept, but it plays into its craziness, while also being allowed to have more serious, more well thought out character moments. So it was very early this year that I actually watched the first film in this small franchise called Searching. Very compelling missing persons movie told in a very unique fashion through a laptop screen. And that's the same thing that happens in Missing, except here the roles are reversed. It's the kid looking for the parent. And I would call this film maybe a coming of age story. She initially takes her mother for granted, but then the film tells her, okay, what if she wasn't there? What if, you have no idea what happened? She could be dead, but you're responsible for maybe saving her life. It's a sequel that is a spiritual sequel that at first seems like a cash grab, but through that concept, it actually does something original and actually makes a statement for itself. Like Searching, it proves you can do a lot on a small budget. It seems to be like a larger conspiracy as well. And then the fact that you get to the end and it's this whole plot twist that differentiates itself from Searching so much. This film is a great companion piece to Searching, and I'm wondering what else they would do with this found footage-esque style of storytelling. One of the biggest surprises of the year. Leading up to it, I hadn't watched any TMNT content for years, and to a certain extent, it actually reignited that TMNT fan inside of me. The animation in this film is incredible. The animators should be very proud of themselves because they made a beautiful looking film as well as a uniquely styled animated film. I like how this film gave an origin story for the turtles that really none of the other films were able to touch on, and especially because it's them as teenagers. Very unexperienced at the beginning, and then they have to learn and grow throughout. I even like the origin story that they gave for April O'Neil, which I didn't expect at all. But I like how they added a bit more meat to that character as well. And the action is very exciting. Superfly was a really cool villain. Great voice casting by Ice Cube. And when the post-credit scene came and it showed Shredder, I was so excited. If they pull it off, that next film is going to be the Dark Knight of this franchise. I'll be damned. If you would have told me at the beginning of the year, even towards the midsection of the year, that Saw X would be in my top 15 films of the year, I would have told you that you were on an acid trip. But lo and behold, Saw went 9 films. First one was good, the other ones, and then the 10th one got it right. It took the concept that was introduced in the first film and executed it with brilliance. I love that it's a character study for John Kramer. And here Tobin Bell gives the best performance of this franchise and a very emotionally potent one. We're following the right character, and the people that we do want to see tortured in this film, it works, and it is a riveting revenge tale. One of these characters that's being tortured is a great villain, the best villain so far in the Saw franchise for Jigsaw to go up against. Such an original direction to take the series. On another note, it also takes time to ask questions about the morality of Jigsaw. The traps are intense. The film is expertly shot. This looks like an actual film, not just another low-budget horror film. One of the only regrets that I have this year is not having seen Saw X in the theater, because I would have definitely supported the filmmakers behind this. And I just hope that Saw 11 just follows in those great footsteps. Even though there are some surprises every year, sometimes there's just the movie that you take a look at and you know, that's for me. That's gonna be awesome. That was me in Sisu. A film that admittedly is, like many other action thrillers we've seen, some dude that's a loner, but we eventually find out that he's a badass when some villains attack him for some reason. But this is just a great version of a type of film that I just love to eat up. It's just so awesome to see this guy rip apart Nazis. There is some great gore, some just crazy kills. The main character, he's just insane. Some of the things he does are just very shocking, but just so badass. And you get to understand a lot about this main character just through visuals, through this actor's performance. An actor that I hope to see more of. If he doesn't make more action movies after this, I don't know what he's doing with his career. It's a film that manages to be over the top while still managing to be grounded enough. On top of that, the film finds humor in just the best places. Especially the ending. The ending of this movie is perfect. I had a really great laugh over it. So I gave this some thought of whether I would break up these two films, put them in two different positions on the list. But in the months leading up to this video, I kind of thought, why? I mean, the internet has done a beautiful job of setting these two movies up. So, at this point, these movies are married. They're kind of synonymous with each other. You talk about one of them, you gotta talk about the other. So I just thought, you know what? I'll just throw them together on the list. So what if the top 15 is actually 16 films? I don't care. But I'll talk about Barbie first. As you can see by this position, I think this movie is great, but, I will acknowledge, as other people on the internet have acknowledged, that the movie's not perfect. The writing isn't always its strongest. Not even my favorite Greta Gerwig film. It's actually my least favorite Greta Gerwig film still. Which, for one thing, when you're lumped in the same pile as Lady Bird and Little Women, that's a hard crowd to be in to try to best those. But seriously, if Barbie is a filmmaker's worst movie, they're a really good filmmaker. Greta Gerwig, I think right now is one of my favorite directors. And this film is just infused to the brim with fun. I've seen the film twice already. I had a great experience watching it with my guy friends. Then I watched it again with my mom, and just the movie's so funny. It's so perfectly cast with both Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling, and just the whole world that Greta Gerwig creates in Barbie Land. Full of color, all the sets and everything. It's just spectacular. As far as the music, I'm Just Ken. I loved that song. Having heard it in the theater, and even before I knew that it was going to be a huge thing on the internet. And that it was going to get awards, apparently. And I loved how this film, while being targeted towards one demographic, that being younger girls, women, it still managed to be a film that a lot of people could enjoy. Now let's move on to my boy Christopher Nolan's latest movie. A movie that I had to watch a couple of times to kind of understand more of what he was going for. And I really appreciate that although this movie is about the Trinity test and dropping the bombs on Japan, it has that in it. It really is a character study of J. Robert Oppenheimer, brought to life by a career best performance by Cillian Murphy. It's a film that is made up 96% of conversations, but yet it's very engrossing. Part of it is the non-linear, which adds tension. As conversations are going on, you're getting shots from different points in the film. The musical score is incredible. I forgot how good this was. I don't even think I mentioned that in the review. I should have. The score, oh my gosh, was intense. It might be one of the best scores that Christopher Nolan has worked with thus far. But of course, the scene that I was most excited for, the scene that this whole film builds up to, the atomic test, marvelously crafted, One of the only moments in the theaters this year, my heart was pounding. I didn't know what I was going to see. And, again, this movie also has its problems. A bit hard to follow because there's so much going on, and it does delve into a lot of parts of Oppenheimer's life. But I thought that when it all came together, it was just another home run from Christopher Nolan.
And just in the end, a fantastic duo of films that started out as a meme, but then became one of the icons of this decade that I'm so glad I was able to experience.
Looking back at my top 10 anticipated list for 2023, very few movies actually, perfectly landed on exactly what I wanted them to be, but Scream 6 was one of them. A film that takes all the promise of the previous film and pays it off to the point where I remember watching this film, its credits, and thinking, yeah, I would be interested in a Scream 7, but this was pretty satisfying. And having seen this film a few more times, and of course all the drama with Scream 7 now, if it's even going to exist, I feel that this film actually ends in a pretty good place. There's actually some pretty good finality in this. It's not perfect, but if this is the last we are going to see of the Carpenter sisters, of the core four, I think this movie did a really good job. I've had a blast with this movie every time that I've seen it. It's one that I've heard people tell me is less meta than what the franchise usually is. I get that, but this movie is more centered around characters. It's more centered around different human relationships, whether that be siblings or just some rom-com stuff that you have in the movie that's kind of cheesy, but it really works because it is. And then where you have different families. The family that is Ghostface victims. Then you have a family in this film that is Ghostface. I would say that of the whole franchise, this movie might be the most thematic in terms of characters. Sam, at this point, is just an icon of this franchise. Maybe, don't shoot me, maybe as iconic as Sydney. And in this film, we get the return of Kirby Reed, which at first just seems like base-level fan service, but there's more meat to it. And such a great scene that she has with Tara explaining why she's an FBI agent. A film that copies off the template of Scream 2, but I feel like in certain respects, it actually does something better with that template. But still, even after mentioning all of this, some people are gonna think I'm crazy for putting this on top of Barbenheimer, and that's fine. I get that a lot of people had their own issues with this film. Some people had an issue with the fact that all the characters survive, and I can understand how maybe that stretches credibility a bit, but I appreciate the novelty of a horror movie that has a more happy ending. Just in the end, is probably the single movie I've been most involved in this year. I did a 15-minute review, and then I did a 35-minute spoiler talk. It's a movie that meant a lot to me this year. As incredible as some of the other films in this franchise are, it still pulled off one of the best. The Holdovers was another movie this year. I saw the trailer, and I was like, that movie looks incredible. That looks so funny, especially the brilliant freeze frame of that trailer with Paul Giamatti. Yes, the movie is funny, but wow, it has so much heart. I've mentioned every so often, a movie almost made me cry, or I started to tear up. That was not the case here. I actually cried when this movie ended. And for me, this movie does touch on some very personal levels. I don't think that I would be doing this right now. I don't even think I would be going to college trying to get a film degree if it wasn't for my high school teacher, Mr. Jametta. He was so supportive. We are still great friends to this day. And I can't imagine a better teacher. I think he is my favorite teacher of all time. And if you're watching this, Mr. Jametta, I love you. But yes, the dynamic that this kid, played by Dominic Sessa, a great performance. Can't wait to see what else he's going to do. The dynamic that he has with Paul Giamatti, his teacher, it just goes to very powerful, just heartfelt places. it really got to me. But again, this movie's really funny. At times it's crass, and I really love that. It's a film that's trying to be retro. It's harkening back to those classic movies from the 80s. It does that perfectly, both in the tone and also the cinematography. And just seeing how all the different characters in this film, there's less of a dynamic of students and teachers, and then it just becomes more of like just one family. This is a movie that I can't wait to get on 4K or Blu-ray or whatever, so that I can just, this can just be a holiday staple of mine. I didn't have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in my anticipated list. In certain aspects, I thought it was just going to be another Marvel movie. I thought James Gunn could do a solid conclusion to these characters, but apparently he didn't make just another Marvel movie. He made the perfect ending for these characters with such a dark tone. And this film just goes to some emotional places that watching the movie a second time, it was like I was unprepared to experience some things again. For one thing, a lot of criticism nowadays towards the CGI in MCU films, and this film looks incredible. The VFX are great, but also Gunn specializes in practical effects. This movie is beautiful. It's the film of the series with the largest stakes, with the best villain. You actually get scared that these characters could die, but you actually get a piece of a trilogy, a finale of a trilogy, where it doesn't have to end with characters dying. They all go their separate ways, the band breaks up, but it all feels right. As great as Gunn's other two films were, I think this is my favorite Guardians film, and it might be Gunn's comic book magnum opus. Talk to Me is my favorite horror film of the year, and one of my favorite horror films of the decade thus far. It's not just an incredible film to watch because I know these YouTubers, I'm a fan of Raka Raka, and just seeing them finally make a horror movie, that's just so entertaining. But the fact that on top of that, they made a horror film that actually has depth to it. The characters are not just fun and likable, they're people that you care about. There's a surprising amount of human drama in this film, which it surprises me because I love Raka Raka. I love the videos, but a lot of them are just kind of intentionally dumb. They're not aspiring to be anything, but this film is definitely a growth for these filmmakers, them experimenting with deeper themes. These people allowing themselves to be possessed, kind of being like an allegory for drugs, tying in this theme of people that have nothing or reaching for something. Their emptiness is causing them to reach for demons. And in that way, when the horror happens, it's not just horrific because it's bloody and there's demons, but you get to see the devastating effects of trauma, how it can put walls between friends and family. But of course, with this, you have to have a great cast, and you do. In particular, Sophie Wilde. I don't know if this is just me over-exaggerating, but this is just how I feel. I feel like this was Oscar-worthy for her. It's definitely star-making. It was so star-making that I actually watched this obscure film called The Portable Door, which is an MGM Plus movie. That wasn't all that great, but I watched it because it has her in it. I can't wait to see what else she does, like many of the other actors I've discussed here today. Given all of that, this film is still an effective horror film in its own right that doesn't rely on jump scares. And this film has some of the most effective use of screen time that I've seen all year. This film doesn't spend too much time on the lore of this hand. It just cuts to the chase of what really works about this film. But on top of that, I'm so intrigued that these brothers are actually making a sequel to this film. Because this film actually leaves the door open for a sequel. I feel like there's more you could do with that. And you could almost have like a Dead Reckoning scenario where, you know, they're going to have to figure out how to stop this demonic stuff from happening. by getting the other hand that's out there somewhere, because that is mentioned in the movie. I think there's something they could do with that. Or if they go somewhere else, I'm sure it's going to be solid nonetheless, because this was an astounding directorial debut for Danny and Michael. I've heard people online call John Wick Chapter 4 a modern epic. I can't disagree with that. Having seen the other three films, I expected this to be a really solid time at the movies. Be a really fun, great action, whatever. But kind of similar to those three, but this film, it just kind of hit on a whole other level. Watching this film a second time, I realized that it's basically a war epic. Kind of like a swords and sandals type epic, except in the world of John Wick, it's with bullets and suits. John Wick is just a small piece of this huge puzzle that director Chad Stahelski brings to brilliant, vibrant life. A dream of his finally come true. It's definitely a dream come true for an action fan like me. There were action sequences in this film in the theater. My jaw dropped to the floor. This being an epic of this size, the dialogue matches that in full. It's very eloquently put, at times intellectual. It's just smart writing. The villain in Bill Skarsgård is the best of this franchise so far. And the fact that 4 films in, we're still getting interesting and unique characters for this world. All that being said, I am a bit curious about John Wick Chapter 5, what they're going to do with that. Because this film, it seemed to end John Wick's story kind of perfectly. I don't see how they're going to come up with another story, another film that matches Chapter 4. This film, outside of some of the action being a bit redundant, maybe running slightly longer than I would prefer, I have a hard time not calling it an action masterpiece. Godzilla Minus One was something I never thought would happen. Sometimes I need to watch a film a couple of times to maybe, just possibly give it that A+ if I think it deserves it. For example, the top 2 movies of this list, that's what happened with. I saw them a couple more times, and I would probably give them that grade if I had it to do over. This was the rarity in a film that I watched one time in a theater, and as soon as it ended, I actually thought of giving out that grade. And I did. Side point, the content I've done on Godzilla Minus One. You guys ate it up. Thank you all for watching those videos. And it is a movie that I still can't think of an issue with. A film where you have Godzilla, but he's not the main thing of this movie. He's just the icing on top of this delicious cake of great characters and deep themes. This movie hit me in the feels way more than I thought it would. Every character in this movie has a purpose to exist. There's no Michael Bay-isms, just like the weird scientist or the dick or just the military badass. Every character in here, they have something to do and they have a moment to shine. And I pretty much like all of them. But when you do get into the Godzilla stuff, the action is incredible. The VFX are astounding. Given that this movie was made for under $15 million, what are we doing, Hollywood? Learn off of Godzilla Minus One. Wow, I got nothing more to say about it. It's awesome. Go check it out. Across the Spider-Verse is easily the best superhero movie of the year, and it's almost as good as the Batman. I still prefer the Batman a bit more, but these two, just like, they are top-tier superhero cinema. Yes, Martin Scorsese, I said cinema. A movie that takes everything that worked about the first film and cranked it up. The comedy in this film easily beats the vast majority of the comedy found in the MCU. This film is so funny while still allowing its more dramatic aspects to take a hold of you and delivers gut punches and heartfelt emotion. And another expansion is that you get more of the Spider-Verse. You get to see a lot of different variants of Spider-Man, a lot of weird variations of the character. But then also, what should be something cheesy, them talking about the Spider-Man canon, events that are destined to happen. That sounds like a joke, but the film actually puts emotion on it. The movie puts stakes on that. While the movie is centered on Miles Morales, all the compelling stuff with that character, everything he has to hide, this journey of him pretty much against the multiverse by the end of the film, and the fact that Gwen Stacy is still just as important of a character. And that's why when the ending happens and you get that huge plot twist and that huge cliffhanger that some people call unsatisfying, I feel her arc was actually completed. So there is satisfaction in that. But also, you can't get away from the fact that some movies just need cliffhangers. And yeah, this movie has a brilliant one. I can't wait to see what they do with it. When I first saw it, I thought the movie was too much happening at once. But then I saw it again and I got used to the tone. And this possibly could be the best Spider-Man film to date. 2023 marks the second year in a row where my most anticipated film for a year ends up being my favorite film of the year. That happened last year with The Batman, and it's happening this year with Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. No matter how many movies I saw after this, no matter how good those movies were after this, every time in my head when I would do a ranking of my favorite films, this one always went to number 1. It always made sense there. And having seen it a second time, I can totally understand why. It's one of, if not the only, films this year that watching it, I just felt like a giddy child. And Mission Impossible is my favorite franchise, and this all could be biased. But the simple fact of the matter is that this is in the running for best action film of the decade. For one thing, it's timely themes, touching on how governments are trying to use power to play around with the truth, and how AI comes into that. The entity in this way being like a stand-in for our interactions online, in particular social media, but just told in a very straightforward way in an expertly directed action film. With Christopher McQuarrie on the director chair, the action sequences just explode off the screen. I was glued to my seat. But what really elevated them was that the stakes were higher. This wasn't just another Mission Impossible movie. What the IMF team is up against in this film, I don't see how they could make a bigger threat than this in the future. Usually part 1s are more setup. This film does its setup, but it still delivers its own experience with its own satisfying conclusion. But yes, going back to that action, Tom Cruise still has it. He is still great in these films, but we also have a great character introduction of Grace, played by Hayley Atwell. And Hayley Atwell gives such a charming performance that she kind of steals the show a lot of points. This person that you can't really trust for a while in the story, but that eventually is aspiring to be more. And all that, I just thought it was a very inspiring arc. The villain, Gabriel, I thought Henry Cavill was the best villain, and maybe on a physicality level he is, but this guy is very menacing. And this movie hints at a dense backstory he has with Ethan, and this film gives you enough of that, while also allowing you to have questions that you're going to hold on to until part 2. This is a film that, like The Batman, I had super high expectations for, and it met all of them on every level, and maybe even exceeded them a bit. So despite all the months that went by after seeing this movie, despite all the movies that went into this list that are incredible, despite all the times that I've had to shift this list around, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning always stayed at number 1. That was 2023. But I'm excited to check out another year with you guys. If you guys haven't noticed, I already did one review for 2024. I reviewed the new Mean Girls. You can check out that video somewhere on the screen, wherever YouTube decides to put it, I guess. But yeah, guys, if you haven't subscribed, make sure to do that. Make sure to hit the like button if you like this content. Comment down below, what are your favorite films of 2023? And guys, as always, have a great day.